From WATM-TV Local 24, this is a special presentation. Freedom Forward, the National Civil Rights Museum grand reopening. Live from the Lorraine Motel, here are Cameron Harper and Kelly Cook.
A new beginning, 23 years after it first opened to the public in downtown Memphis, the National Civil Rights Museum is opening again. Good evening to you. I'm Cameron Harper.
And I'm Kelly Cook. Welcome to a Local 24 special, Freedom Forward. You're looking right behind us. We just saw the men of Alpha Phi Alpha coming in. We're going to take a peek inside of that new museum, the renovations, as we mark the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s death.
But before we get to all of the ceremony here, we need to take a moment to introduce you to the newest member of the Local 24 CW30 family, our new weekend anchor, Kelly Cook. Welcome back home, Kelly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I grew up right here in the Mid-South, went to Germantown High School. I spent plenty of time there inside that museum, making sure I learned the history of this city. So it's a pleasure to come back. I was in Orlando, Florida, and it's good to be back here in Memphis.
And we know you have a big family in Memphis, and again, welcome home. What a spectacular day to start your job here with us, and for the grand reopening of the National Civil Rights Museum as well. It is a beautiful Memphis day. We're expecting Governor Haslam to be among the speakers here this afternoon, and he will be up in a few minutes, as well as members of the clergy who will be involved in doing a number of readings here this afternoon.
Yeah, that's right. Right now, just behind us, the men, as I mentioned before, of Alpha Alpha are bringing in flowers and a wreath as well. Several men are coming in. We're going to be hearing from Rudy Williams in just a few minutes. He is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, so we'll hear from him in just a bit. But 46 years ago today, Cameron, that was a day Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Was murdered on the balcony of room 306 right here at the Lorraine Motel.
A day that changed American history forever. 6:01 in the evening, a single shot rang out from the boarding house across the street from the Lorraine Motel. That was a shot fired by James Earl Ray, and it killed Dr. Martin Luther King, who was standing in front of room 306. At the what is now the National Civil Rights Museum, what was, of course, then the Lorraine Motel.
Yeah, and it is a big moment. At 6:01 each year, they like to have a moment of silence. Take a moment to remember the moment that really changed America, that changed the civil rights movement that was happening here in Memphis, across the South, across the country. And they take a moment every year, not just on this day when they're reopening the Civil Rights Museum.
We've been listening to a mournful sax, and the moment is here.
In that moment. I'm Beverly Robertson, president of the National Civil Rights Museum. Each year, members of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity come in remembrance of their fallen brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The procession of the members is led by Stephen Hunter on saxophone. Welcome as we gather once more to honor the life, sacrifice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King was drafted into the movement the day Rosa Parks challenged segregated bus seating in Montgomery, Alabama. And by the way, he was 26 years old. He was propelled to positions of leadership in the Montgomery Improvement Association and later the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He received numerous accolades and awards, including the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize.
Our team is all over the museum grounds this evening for the ceremonies and the memorial out here tonight, and along with the grand reopening. So let's go down now to Rodney Dunnigan and Joy Lambert, our Good Day anchors.
Well, good evening, Cameron and Kelly. You know, this is always a very emotional ceremony. You mentioned it was 46 years ago today that Dr. King was assassinated. But despite that time frame, this is still always emotional for everyone who comes down here to participate, and also for the members of Alpha Phi Alpha who come to lay that wreath. And, of course, every year on this date, the museum takes time to remember Dr. King by laying this wreath.
Yeah, you know what was so interesting is when that procession happened just now, you saw people run down here to be a part of it. You knew every everything was starting and people wanted to see the members of Alpha Phi Alpha walk in with the candles and remember their fallen brother, who everybody considers a fallen brother. Now, the Reverend Colenso Hubbard has the honor of changing this year's wreath. He's the founder of the Emmanuel Episcopal Center in Memphis.
And, you know, we did a bit of a research on Pastor Hubbard because obviously, you know, you always wonder when somebody is involved in an event like this, you know, why are they chosen to speak? And obviously, Pastor Hubbard has made a major impact on this community, just as Dr. King did. And Pastor Hubbard, you know, he started his church with only 5 boys at a game of touch football, and that started one of the strongest inner city ministries in this city.
It's amazing, and that inner city program continues to this day. He conducts after-school activities for many kids in North Memphis, and he is a founding member of Promise Academy Charter School, and the inner city group work that he does works a lot with that program. So it's a very, very touching to have him here today.
Yeah, and to speak of some of the words that he's going to be talking about, we got our hands on the program here, and just some of his remarks that I found pretty interesting. You know, tonight as we commemorate the anniversary of our loss, we hold candles to remember, to remind us that the light that Dr. King brought into the world will never be extinguished as long as we're here to remember, to renew, and to rebirth that dream. And I think those are poignant words, to remember, to renew, and rebirth that dream. And for every year since those 46 years ago, you know, people have come back to remember Dr. King and lay this wreath, obviously.
Absolutely huge. And, you know, Governor Bill Haslam is here tonight. He is just stepping to the podium. Very exciting to have him here on the reopening of the Civil Rights Museum.
Yeah, and if we can, let's take a few moments to listen to what the governor has to say.
You know, I can't presume to speak to all the emotion and all of the thought and anguish that comes with this balcony on an April night at this point in our history. But I can say with deep gratitude for this particular city that reacted to the horrible act of hate from a man shooting from a boarding house over on Mulberry Street, that reacted first with shock and then with heartbreak, but finally with commitment and resolve to remember this man who literally changed the trajectory of history, to remember the movement that spawned him and led him to this point, and to commit to have a museum here that is so world-class that the New York Times last week called it a model for what other museums should be like. That commitment from this city, I think, speaks volumes about people here who are committed to not just remembering what happened on one horrible night, but committed to the goals and dreams of a man who...
Something interesting that the governor just said. Obviously, the museum here was just highlighted by the New York Times to be a model of what a museum is like. And obviously, after going through a multi-million-dollar renovation, obviously we all can't wait to get inside and kind of, you know, see what it's like in there.
Absolutely. It's going to be a huge moment for everybody when they walk in the first time. It's overwhelming how transformed this building is. And he also wanted people to remember the movement. That is the reason we are all here tonight. A very, very touching night here.
Yeah, and to kind of move you along, to kind of tell you some of the events that are going to be happening. As this wreath is being changed, you'll hear Sharice Scott sing. She'll be singing the song, Someday We'll All Be Free. Now, this song was originally performed in 1973 and is a tribute to black rights. And we looked up a bit of information about this song, too. Pretty interesting. It is primarily due to Spike Lee and his movie Malcolm X. He featured it at the end of his film Malcolm X. That kind of brought this song to light, and now it's known as the tribute to black rights. So pretty interesting why this song was chosen today.
It's very cool. And after the song, the men of Alpha Phi Alpha will have a special salute to Dr. King. We, of course, watched them all walk in unison together holding candles. And Rodney, I know that you learned a lot about Alpha Phi Alpha this week, and you know a lot about them in the past.
Oh, definitely. You know, one of their interesting projects that they have, they're all about community service and giving back to this community the same way that Dr. King did. And they have a very interesting project called Project Alpha, where they try to teach kids in the inner city life skills. And I got a chance to, you know, kind of get in deep and to kind of see what they do. And their main purpose or main goal is to just, you know, keep that dream of Dr. King alive, of community service, of giving back. So that was very interesting, and we'll hear more about the Alphas as well as that project a bit later in this special. But we are going to toss it on over to Local 24's Rudy Williams, who's a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, and he's going to give us a bit more information about this salute and what's going to be going on with that. Rudy.
An historic day here in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a great day for lots of people, especially for me. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Brother Dr. King was also a member. That's one of the reasons that I joined this organization, to follow in the long legacy, the line of legacy of men like Dr. Martin Luther King, Lionel Richie, Paul Robeson, Jesse Owens. The list goes on and on and on of leaders, of men who put their heart and soul into the community and invited people to join and follow them and walk with them, and making sure that their lives were enriched and better and better and better by what they did every day. The men of Alpha Phi Alpha, the local chapter, is here today. They're doing a ceremony to honor Dr. King on this very special day today. We're going to catch more of that ceremony in just a little bit. Some great music is happening here, a lot of great tributes, some very moving moments. We'll have more of that. We're going to go back to Cameron and Kelly right now.
All right, thank you very much, Rodney. We also want to, Rodney, then again, Joy Lambert, as well as Rudy Williams. We want to let you know that we are live tweeting this event. We just ask that you use hashtag Freedom Forward. We want to see what you're saying. Are you enjoying the program? What are you looking forward to about this museum? And you can see the hashtag will be coming up there at the bottom of your screen.
Hashtag Freedom Forward. We do want to hear from you tonight to share your experiences and your thoughts. Dr. King's return visit to Memphis in the spring of 1968 came just weeks after a violent march, after a march he led here in Memphis turned violent. Dr. King also gave one of his most famous speeches here in Memphis. That's the mountaintop speech. Yeah,
he delivered it April 3rd, 1968 at the Mason Temple in South Memphis. A lot of folks there probably still remember that. He was murdered outside room 306 at the Lorraine Motel.
The mountaintop speech, such an iconic speech, and has come to be emblematic of the civil rights movement. There were only a few people with Dr. King at the Lorraine Motel the night that he was killed, and one of them was the Reverend Billy Kiles. Late last year, I had an opportunity to sit down with Reverend Kiles and talk about the final moments of Dr. King's life.
Dinner was to be served at my home. I went to pick him up at the motel. I told him it was one time, and he told him, he called the house and they told him it was a different time. So that gave us an hour to finish getting ready. So you gotta get ready. So three of us, three preachers in a room, Abernathy, King, and Kiles, the last three. And so what did three preachers do in a room for an hour? Said, we talk preacher talk. He said, what you mean you talk preacher? I said, just like barbers talk, barber talk. And we were having fun. Just good, clean, wholesome fun. Martin and I walked on the porch. Abernathy was still in the room. He said, come on, Ralph, you're gonna make us late. Some bitty talk like that. So you're gonna make us late. He said, well, it's not our intention to make you late. I just wanna be looking right, because might be some pretty ladies over there. I want to be looking right. Jesse Jackson was walking on the lower part. And he said, Jesse, don't bring that whole band to Kyle's house. He said, I'm not going to bring the band. He said, well, don't bring him. It's too many. He said, but my musician wants to meet you. You brought the music. He said, okay. Jesse Jackson leaned over on the railing of the balcony. Ralph was still in the room. Jesse was leaning over. I said, guys, come on, let's go. By that time, the shot rang out. Kapow! Martin was here and I was here. The bullet knocked him to the ground, to the floor. I turned and saw him follow. And oh my goodness, chaos. What can I do? Why was I there? Of all the places I could have been, all the places he could have been, why was I there at that moment in time? And over the years, God revealed to me why I was there. Martin didn't die in some foolish, untoward way. He didn't overdose. He wasn't shot leaving the scene of a crime. He was a man with a PhD at 27, Nobel Peace Prize at 34, all the things he could have been. And here he is as we speak. Here he is, lying bloody on the cold sidewalk of a motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And they said, we will shoot this dreamer and see what happens to his dream. Yes, I must admit it, I must be honest. You can kill the dreamer, but no, you cannot kill the dream.
And no one can bring home that message today like Reverend Billy Kiles, the man who was there when Dr. King was assassinated here in Memphis, Tennessee. When he tells that story, it makes 1968 real for his audience.
Yeah, you can feel it when he's talking about it. Kapow! When he said that, it's like it just happened yesterday.
You feel the impact.
Absolutely. Right now, on this day, on the day that Martin Luther King was shot and killed, we're going to hear the voice of Dr. King that's being played right now at this prayer vigil. Let's listen in.
More than 112 cities have desegregated their lunch counters in the border and southern states. Therefore, we see tangible gains as a result of this very impressive and magnificent movement that has engulfed our Southland and electrified not only our nation but the whole world.
Let us just reflect.
Haunting during this moment of silence to think about the
Each
words of
year.
Dr. King.
Absolutely.
Killed 46 years
Do
ago
a
here at the
symbolic
Lorraine Motel.
act
Yeah.
that renews and refreshes us in the
Candles
spirit of
lit.
Dr. King. And that involves
Taking the
chanting
time
the
to
wreath
remember
on the
this day.
balcony. And this year, we will do it again. May we have the installation of the wreath.
And there is the new wreath marking the spot in front of room 306.
Inside 306, they change that wreath every year, and this year is especially special considering the renovations that are happening here at the museum.
Extensive renovations, a spectacular new museum in so many ways to show you. Coming up,
he said that he was going to be with us until we won.
the labor strike that changed the nation was right here in Memphis.
We'll hear from one man who was on the front lines of the sanitation strike of 1968. That's coming up next. And welcome back to Local 24 special presentation, Freedom for the Candlelight Vigil. Right now you're hearing a soloist singing, "Someday We Will All Be Free," a
The
dream
music
of
here
Dr.
is
King.
beautiful.
It's beautiful. Very nice. All right now, we just saw the changing of the wreaths. Now, this is all brought about when the Memphis sanitation strike brought Dr. King to the Bluff City over 46 years ago.
That was in March of 1968. He came to lead the sanitation workers in what was supposed to be a peaceful march. But it turned violent when the marchers were met with police carrying billy clubs and using tear gas.
Yeah, well, those 1,300 sanitation workers didn't stop at that protest, and neither did Dr. King. Dr. King was determined. He wanted to have a nonviolent protest. So he came back in early April.
Local 24's Austin Lewis spoke with a man who was part of those marches, a man who joined the strike to better support his family. And he tells her the story of what it was like in 1968 to be on the front lines of history.
I will die standing up for the freedom of my people.
His words moved a nation. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s promise to sanitation worker Alvin Turner did the same thing.
He said that he was going to be with us until we won.
And it is criminal to have people working at a full-time job getting part-time income.
But before King marched in downtown Memphis, 2 men died, sparking a strike that changed the city. Robert Walker and Elka Cole sat in the garbage barrel of a truck. It malfunctioned and crushed them to death.
If these were relatives of mine, it really hurt.
11 days after they died, the sanitation workers left the trucks behind and hit the picket line.
We went to all these people and explained to them that this type thing can happen to you. Then we went on strike to make sure that this wouldn't happen to anybody else.
Alvin Turner was 34 years old when he joined hundreds of sanitation workers wanting fair treatment and pay.
That sound you just heard was the sound of tear gas fired by a police officer.
Police used tear gas and clubs on protesters. Violence swept downtown Memphis.
They were beating the guy across from me. And I said, "Dang, look how they beating that poor man."
Turner couldn't escape the violence.
And this policeman took that billy club, whop, and popped me right here.
The wound healed, but 46 years later, the memory remains.
This scar will be there the rest of my life.
Almost the entire force is standing by here.
Sanitation workers face threat from the men in blue.
The garbage is going to be picked up in Memphis.
And City Hall. Memphis Mayor Henry Loeb refused to negotiate with the workers. Turner says it was hard to see the mayor speak so strongly against the strike.
I knew what I was doing was right. I had a family to feed. I had little girls to educate. For him to take the stand that he took, it was really painful.
And they're not permitting the march to move any further.
It all changed for workers when Dr. King stood with them.
We was asking to be treated as men. We was asking for a fair wage. And I knew if he gonna stay with us, we gonna win.
I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promise.
Turner says even through death, he believes King kept his promise.
Now this one, the one that we brought home with us.
Now, years after the strike, he's received every honor possible, a key to the city, awards, and a legacy. President Obama met Turner and the others who lived through the strike. Turner says he told them this.
If it wasn't for the stand we took in 1968, he might not be president today. I stuck my chest out, and anytime the president, I tell you that you is responsible, you did something responsible for him being elected. I am them for it.
It is the compelling story of how a small group of men determined to get a better life changed everything.
And the cause that brought them right back here to the Bluff City that fateful day. Right now, we want to take you back to the Candlelight Vigil where the men of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated are doing a special presentation.
Or as a 1966 attendant of the Southern Regional Convention held here in Memphis as well. When called, Brother King was here. All this while providing service and advocacy to countless communities, but especially to this community, Memphis. Memphis was special, a must-win for him. He was incomparable, a must-have for Memphis. Though the world and the fraternity lost him here, we also have him here. His physical presence is gone, yet his legacy of hope, healing, happiness, and prosperity live on.
The men of Alpha Psi Alpha doing their great work. That, of course, was Dr. King's fraternity.
Absolutely.
In 1991, the National Civil Rights Museum opened its doors to the public for the first time here in Memphis.
Yeah, but it took a lot of time and money to get it to becoming a world-class museum, and that's exactly what it is. Let's go back down to Local 24's Good Day anchors Joy Lambert and Rodney Dunnigan for more on the history of this museum.
Well, Kelly, you mentioned that this is a world-class museum. It's amazing. You know, some of us were lucky enough to actually get a chance to go inside to see some of this renovation. $27 million in renovations, and let me tell you, the place is spectacular.
It is absolutely jaw-dropping when you walk inside. It is a completely new museum. Everything's interactive, and we're so excited to get a sneak peek at that later on in the show.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you know, the museum opens up to the public officially tomorrow, so I'm sure a lot of folks are pretty excited to hear about that. But obviously, you know, when doing this special, we had to do a little bit of background information. And for those folks that don't know, some interesting facts about this place. Before the National Civil Rights Museum actually became a museum, this was one of the few motels here in the city of Memphis that actually served African-American travelers during the segregated South.
And it's interesting, I had the opportunity to sit down with Museum President Beverly Robertson earlier this week, and she said that's particularly one of the reasons MLK chose this hotel to stay at, because of what it represented. And he was definitely in some good company. Ray Charles, Lionel Hampton, and Aretha Franklin have all stayed at the Lorraine Motel. Now, businessman Walter Bailey bought the motel in 1945 and named it after his wife, Lori. Very cute story. Local 24's Jamie McGriff gives us a history lesson of the Lorraine Motel.
Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
Dr. King and the history of the Lorraine Motel will be forever intertwined. Nearly 50 years ago, on April 4th, 1968, tragic violence resulted in his death. Walter Bailey, the motel owner, preserved 2 rooms, 306 and 307, honoring Dr. King and Bailey's wife, who died days after Dr. King's assassination. Things were never the same after that. The motel faced a long and steep decline of business and finally, in 1982, went up for foreclosure. A group of prominent Memphians and civil rights activists answered the public outcry to save Lorraine and formed the Martin Luther King Memorial Foundation.
Originally, we were just formed out of the necessity of saving the Lorraine Motel because it was being sold at foreclosure. And we had no discussions at that point. We were just busy trying to raise the money to buy the motel.
DeArmie Bailey, who at the time was a lawyer, says the foundation's name eventually changed to the Lorraine Civil Rights Museum Foundation to avoid any legal trouble with Dr. King's family.
And actually, I was rather pleased by that because I really wasn't out to see a Martin Luther King museum. We were simply going to use this extraordinary historic site and teach about the civil rights movement.
Not long after that, the campaign to save Lorraine took off.
Foreclosure auction, Lorraine Motel, Memphis, Tennessee, sale to be conducted at Shelby County Courthouse at 12 noon.
DeArmie Bailey spearheaded the effort to help the foundation raise $144,000 to buy the Lorraine Motel on the courthouse steps in downtown Memphis during a public auction.
When the bidding got to about $75,000, $80,000, most of the others who were bidding dropped out.
Lorraine Motel is saved, but the next big hurdle was figuring out how to find enough money and support in order to convert this site into a museum and recognize the place where Dr. King was assassinated.
After the property was saved from foreclosure, the next step was, what are we going to do?
Archie Willis III spoke on behalf of his late father, A.W. Willis Jr., who played a political role in helping to establish the National Civil Rights Museum. He was the first African American elected to the state legislature since Reconstruction.
And he had came up with a plan to provide 3% financing to homeowners called the Home Buyers Revolving Loan Fund that involved the county and the state.
His son recounts the next hurdle the group faced to preserve the motel.
Of course, I think the total budget was, I believe, $8.8 million at that time, and they started trying to determine where the money could come from.
Back then, the foundation knew that they could raise some money, but not that kind of money.
So the idea was to talk with the state, county, and city about being significant funders, because this is something that that group felt the public sector should embrace and support, and we needed to honor Dr. King's legacy.
Willis was pivotal in reaching out to Tennessee lawmakers in Nashville, including Ned McWhorter, who back then was a longtime House Speaker looking to run for governor.
There were two groups of people who spoke out about preserving the legacy of the National Civil Rights Museum. You had those who were for it and those who were against it.
Why would you want to have a museum where a person was assassinated? Well, it means a lot to us, and we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that this was the place where he was assassinated, and it's not something we're proud of, but it's history, and we need to turn it into a positive.
And the positive is exactly what happened, starting with McWhorter. He won.
He won.
And
he kept his promise.
Wow, that's an amazing story to hear. Just to imagine that this important piece of Memphis history, this important piece of American history may not be here today if it weren't for those Memphians who were kind of thinking ahead and say, hey, this place can be special. This place can be not only a place where we remember Dr. Martin Luther King, but a place where we can teach people about African American history, where we can teach people about the civil rights struggle. And, you know, it all started here. That is an amazing story.
Amazing. Could you imagine if this actually had gone into foreclosure and the building had been gone forever? I can't imagine all the history that would have been lost with that. Just an amazing group of men. And I had the opportunity, like I said, to speak with Beverly Robinson, the president of the museum here, and she said it so poignantly that a site of great tragedy has turned into such great triumph.
Exactly.
And it's so true. It's so true, those words. And what's interesting, too, about a little bit of history here, Bailey's wife, Jamie, mentioned briefly that she died just days after MLK's assassination. Beverly told me, in her perspective, that the wife died essentially of a broken heart because she was here that day. She wasn't supposed to be here that day. She was here, and she happened to see everything, and she fainted along with everybody else, I'm sure, and just was never able to recover.
Yeah.
Such a crazy story, and I can't imagine going through that and seeing this, and now the fact that they have made this motel what it is today, where we bring in thousands of visitors every year. It's just so remarkable.
And I mean, just to see all the kids, you know, walking around here with their parents, and they're, you know, learning more about Dr. Martin Luther King, learning more about, you know, African American history, and just to think, you know, they wouldn't have that if it weren't for those people fighting. And obviously, again, we mentioned that this was a $27 million renovation project. Obviously, a lot of folks excited about going to see it tomorrow. And, you know, over the next few years, just to imagine the kids, the communities, and the people that are going to be impacted by this place is just amazing to think about.
And, you know, you can go see museums across the country, but where can you go to a museum where history actually happened?
Exactly.
And such important history.
Yeah, and it's amazing with us covering this today. It's funny, you kind of feel like you're a part of history right now. And it's amazing just to hear the folks, you know, singing, to see the emotional wreath-laying ceremony. I mean, just to hold the, you know, candle for the moment of silence. It's amazing to be out here, and you can really tell the emotions from folks, that it's really, you know, emotional. Again, 46 years after Dr. King's assassination, it's still fresh in the memories of a lot of folks out here.
Absolutely. Let's toss it on back up to Cameron Harper and Kelly Cook.
All right, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, right now we are doing the litany reading where all the different faiths is coming forward to read a portion right now.
There's a multicultural support, multi-religious support for the museum and the activities here every year, and that's part of what we're listening to and seeing right now.
All right.
The renovation project at the National Civil Rights Museum took months, years to complete, really, years in the making.
Yeah, millions of dollars. Coming up, we'll show you what it took to create some of the new exhibits inside the museum. The contractors face some unusual challenges. We'll tell you about it. Stay with us.